Here is part 2. I'm sure you've already subscribed to Frontline Macroanalysis TV. If you haven't, here it is a chance. While at it, don't forget to share with your friends too so they know what is happening. In part 1, we uncovered the outer layers of the 15-minute city debate, the hidden rules, the invisible limits, the soft restrictions disguised as convenience. But now, in part 2, we move closer to the core, from issues 10 to 6, where the implications get sharper, the stakes get higher, and the potential for misuse becomes impossible to ignore. If the first 5 concerns made you uneasy, these next 5 might just make you rethink what it means to live in a planned city. Because once you see how these elements connect, you'll realize we are not just talking about urban design, we are talking about the architecture of control. Let's get into issue 10 and see how the blueprint starts to take shape. Number 10. One-size-fits-all living. Cities are complex, messy, and diverse, and that's part of what makes them great. But a danger with 15-minute city laws is that they can impose a one-size-fits-all model of living. Under these plans, each zone is designed to have the same mix of services: schools, parks, medical clinics, grocery stores. Sounds neat and tidy, but here's the issue: not all communities have the same needs. The only way this is possible is the system I call caged chicken system. Like this system, all services and amenities must be regulated and be precise, which means any zone deemed disobedient to the master will have these systems switched off as punishment. Another danger is, like a chicken, if the system malfunctions, the entire flock dies, and so does the same system within this zone. The point here is the dependency, which is the opposite of freedom. Picture a zone with a strong artistic community. They might thrive on studios, performance spaces, and late-night venues. Another zone might be home to a large elderly population that needs more clinics, quiet spaces, and accessible transport. If the city mandates the same layout and facilities for every zone, it can flatten out the unique culture and identity of different neighborhoods. And then there's personal choice. What if you don't want to shop at the grocery store in your zone because it's overpriced, or you just like the selection elsewhere? What if your favorite park is across town? In a flexible city, you can make those choices. In a strictly enforced 15-minute model, those freedoms could be replaced with designated options that you're expected to use. To be frank here, these freedoms seem small and irrelevant until you don't have them. Then you will understand why you should never have opted into these laws in the first place. Supporters of the system say it's about equality, giving every neighborhood equal access to essential services. But equality isn't always the same as sameness. Sometimes, in trying to make everything equal, you end up making it bland. In the worst-case scenario, the one-size-fits-all approach could erode the vibrancy and character that makes cities worth living in. You don't just lose variety, you lose the freedom to choose the variety that's right for you. Number 9. Zone inflation. Here's a problem that doesn't get talked about enough: zone inflation. When you concentrate demand inside a fixed area, whether that's for housing, groceries, or basic services, prices go up. It's the same reason a bottle of water costs more at an airport than at your local store: limited competition and a captive audience. Now imagine that your 15-minute city zone is designed to keep you shopping, eating, and working locally. Great for convenience, but also a perfect setup for price hikes. With fewer people allowed or willing to travel outside their zone, businesses have less incentive to keep prices competitive. Why lower your grocery prices when your customers are legally or practically discouraged from shopping elsewhere? We've seen how this works in isolated environments. Think about resort towns, mining camps, or even military bases. all places where people have fewer options, and prices rise accordingly. A tightly enforced 15-minute zone could create the same effect on a citywide scale. Of course, supporters will argue that more local demand means more competition within the zone, which could drive prices down. That's possible, but only if there's enough variety of suppliers. And remember, big chains can afford to open in every zone, while small businesses can't. That often means fewer true competitors and more market consolidation. The long-term risk is that cost of living inside these zones creeps upward, slowly at first, then sharply, while wages stay the same. And because movement is restricted, residents can't just shop around for better deals. They're locked into their local economy, for better or worse. Number 8. Spontaneity shutdown. One of the underrated joys of living in a free, open city is spontaneity. You can decide, on a whim, to drive across town for dinner, to meet friends last minute in a park on the other side of the city, to take a scenic route home just because you feel like it. But in a rigidly enforced 15-minute city, spontaneity could become a luxury, or even a rule-breaking act. If movement between zones is limited by fines, permits, or digital travel credits, you'd need to plan every trip in advance. Last-minute decisions could cost you money or risk penalties. Think about the effect this would have on culture. Events, nightlife, festivals, all thrive on people being able to cross zones freely. Cut that freedom, and you don't just restrict movement, you shrink the social life of the city itself. We got a taste of this during COVID-19 lockdowns. Remember when even short trips required justification? People weren't just restricted physically, their sense of possibility was crushed. Life transformed into what was allowed, not what was possible. Proponents say, but you can still do those things, you'll just have to stay within your local zone most of the time. But that's the point. The most of the time becomes a cage. You can't really live a full, dynamic life if your geography is micromanaged by the city government. Spontaneity is part of freedom. Take it away, and you take away the kind of rich, unpredictable experiences that make life worth living. Number 7. Political power grab. Every system starts with a promise. The promise of cleaner streets, better transport, a smaller carbon footprint. But here's the problem with systems like the 15-minute city. Once they're in place, they're tools that can be used, or abused, by whoever holds power. The infrastructure of a 15-minute city, surveillance cameras, digital travel passes, restricted movement zones, it's all neutral only in theory. In practice, it's political dynamite. Imagine a protest in Zone D. The authorities could instantly cut off travel to that area under the guise of safety. Or suppose a political opponent draws strong support from certain districts. Suddenly, movement restrictions in those districts get tighter. You might be thinking this is far-fetched, but history says otherwise. Governments of all political stripes have used crises, from wars to pandemics, to expand control. And rarely do they give that control back without a fight. Even if the system starts with the best intentions, you have to think about what happens when leadership changes. Would you trust every future mayor, premier, or prime minister to handle this power responsibly? Supporters often respond, but this is about urban planning, not politics. The truth is, urban planning is politics. How space is organized, who can go where, and when, those decisions are deeply political. The danger isn't just in the rules of the 15-minute city itself, it's in the potential of those rules to be weaponized for control. Once a tool exists, someone, someday, will try to use it for more than it was designed for. And by then, the system will already be in place. Number 6. Segregation by design. When urban planners talk about 15-minute cities, they often use words like inclusivity and community. But here's the paradox. If not carefully designed, these zones can actually make a city more segregated. Let's break it down. Each zone is supposed to have its own mix of schools, shops, parks, and clinics. In theory, everyone has equal access. But in practice, zones will differ. Some will have better schools, cleaner streets, and more investment. Others, often where lower-income families live, will get the bare minimum. And here's the kicker. Movement restrictions make it harder for residents in underfunded zones to access the higher quality amenities in better funded ones. That locks in inequality. You don't just live in a different neighborhood, you live in a completely different tier of the city. We've seen this before. South Africa and redlining in the United States, for example, deliberately separated communities by race and income, restricting access to housing and loans. The long-term effect was to entrench poverty and limit opportunity. The difference with 15-minute cities is that this separation wouldn't just happen by economics, it could happen by law. Supporters will say, but we'll make sure every zone gets equal funding and resources. That's a noble goal, but history tells us funding priorities shift with politics. Over time, some zones will get upgrades, others will be neglected, and the people living there will have fewer ways to escape that imbalance. The result could be a city divided into micro-communities that rarely interact. Instead of bringing people together, you end up creating invisible walls. Not through fences or borders, but through the structure of the city itself. That was part 2, issues 10 to 6, where the 15-minute city begins to show its true operating system. We've looked at the inner mechanics, the rules that could quietly limit freedom while presenting themselves as everyday conveniences. But we are not done. The final part of this series, issues 5 to 1, covers the most alarming possibilities, the kind of scenarios that change a city forever, and once in place, may be impossible to undo. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know how deep this rabbit hole goes. In part 3, we'll hit the bottom, and what's waiting there is something you need to see for yourself.